and then we'll get you in. Okay, ready? I declare open this hearing of the Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport References Committee for its inquiry into the Australian Winegrape Purchasers Code of Conduct. For the benefit of witnesses, I am the Chair, Senator Matt Canavan, and I'm joined in the room today by the Deputy Chair, Senator Glenn Sterle, Senator Richard Colbeck to my left, and Senator Barbara Pocock at the other end. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to be heard in camera. Before I start, I'd like to remind everyone these are official parliamentary proceedings. A Hansard record will be prepared and the discussions are being broadcast. If a witness objects to answering a question, you should state the ground upon which that objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. Please, we've got a few people on video link here, so if you could mute your microphones when you're not speaking, that'd be great. And I now welcome those witnesses by video conference, the Riverina Winegrape growers. Thanks for joining us this morning. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the record, could you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today? If everyone can do that, that's there, and I'll let you decide the order.
Rightio, I'm Jeremy Cass. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Riverina Winegrape Growers.
Great. And others?
I'm Bruno, Brombal, Chair of the Riverina Winegrape Growers and the Grape Grower.
Morning, I'm Robert Bellato, I'm the Deputy Chair of the Riverina Winegrape Growers and also the Grape Grower.
There's only the three of us here. Steve must have got held up, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. We've got your submission. We appreciate that. And you do have an opportunity to make an opening statement if you'd like to us before we go to questions. Would you like to make an opening statement?
Yeah, no, that'd be good. I think that, the reason that we wanted to have this hearing with you guys was to really express where we're at. You met with our colleagues in the Murray Valley and the Riverland when you went down to the Riverland. And I would like to suggest that out of the three big regions, we're the worst off, especially with regard to where this is all going with the Code of Conduct. And the reason for that is we basically have lower yields in those two places, and we are seeing some lower prices as well, especially in the more popular varieties. And I know that the Code of Conduct's not going to change pricing, that's purely supply and demand. But some of the big issues that do affect us down here at the moment are the release of prices, so we know whether it's worthwhile to grow our grape crop in the year, and the terms of payment. We've got wineries down here that are still owe 30 to 40% on last year's crop, and we're picking this year's crop, and there's nothing that we can do about that. We aren't lucky enough to have the same legislation that South Australia's got, which prohibits that from happening. And the AUSParliamentLive doesn't want to do anything to help us at the moment with regard to those sort of things, although when they did first come in 2019 talking about the Code of Conduct, they did say that, unless these things were fixed, then we would be looking at a mandatory code, and that's not happening. So, we're pretty anxious to pass on those views to let you guys know just how unfair it is to growers down here. We're getting paid less than the cost of production. And then that payment, 40% of that payment's not coming in until 12 months after or more that we've delivered the crop. So, those sort of things will change if we have a mandatory code. And the other thing that we've got with the other code at the moment is that it's got no teeth, and growers are basically scared to basically go and approach anyone about it because of reprisals from wineries. We've got a lot of issues that need to be fixed, and we believe that a mandatory code would do that.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that. I might just kick off with a few questions first and then go to others. What's the situation in your growing area with the current voluntary code? How many of the winemakers have signed up to that?
Well, we've got six main players in the wine industry down here. Or you may as well say, we could say seven. Three of them are signatories to the code, the other four aren't.
Right, okay. Is there any material difference then in the conduct of those that have signed up to the code and those that haven't?
Definitely. The ones that have signed up to the code, we're thankful for what they're trying to do. We get 3 payments off those guys, and the prices come out when it's required by the code on the second Wednesday of December, which really is still too late. But the other 3, basically, they can release their prices a week before harvest. This year it's been a little bit earlier than that, but they did definitely wait until the other guys came out. So what we're actually seeing with regard to all that is that the people who are members of the voluntary code or are signatories to the voluntary code are actually being disadvantaged by the non-signatories who are utilising their information once it's released to then go and document their own prices.
Right, okay, yep, that's a good point. So would you like to see simply everyone sign up to a, if you like, a mandatory code as it is at the moment, just simply make the voluntary code mandatory, or do you think there's also additional things that need to be added to the existing voluntary code to make a mandatory code work?
Well, I think there's things that, you know, if we just signed up to a mandatory code today. There's probably issues with that as well. We'd like to see a mandatory code include things like negotiations and arbitration. We'd like to see the ACCC become the overseers of that code and be responsible for any penalties. We'd like to see the code have some teeth so that, you know, at the moment, the voluntary code, if someone doesn't agree with what's going on, if they're a signatory, they can just opt out and do what they want to do.
Okay, all right. Well, I might come back with some of those specific points, but I'll just rotate the call. Senator Pocock.
Thank you, and thanks for appearing today and for your submission, which I must say, as a senator, I found a model submission, just very clear and sharp to the point about what you're looking for. And I want to go to your submission, the first page of it. Actually, it's page 7. You talk about the unilateral changes to contract terms, delayed payments, which you've mentioned this morning, non-transparent deductions for quality assessments, which I read as the kind of manipulation of quality. And you've also verbally said this morning that there are real issues with reprisals with growers who stand up for themselves. You're pointing to a mandatory code, everyone in, which has transparent contract terms, binding dispute resolutions, which you've said also again this morning, and penalties. We heard evidence from the ACCC last week, you may have tuned in, and they pointed to the fact that in 2018 they did concede that the possibility for a mandatory code might be needed, and they certainly didn't rule it out in their evidence to us as I read the transcript. But they made the point there's no point in having a mandatory code with meaningful provisions where everyone's roped in that doesn't have real compliance and penalties. That's what I'm hearing from you this morning. So I wanted to just hear if I make sure we've understood that correctly. And I then also wanted to go to the issue of the timing of the transparency of price signals. Some witnesses have said the signal in December is way too late. It should be at the end of September so growers can make decisions about resource allocations, water, fertiliser, all the things. Is that also something you support?
Oh, definitely. We support all of that. You know, at the moment, when we get our pricing in, even the second week in October, or the second Wednesday in October, you know, basically our growing season's over. We've had huge inflation, so all our input costs are up, and we're getting less than the cost of production at the moment. So, you know, some of our prices are as low as $150 a tonne for things like Shiraz, and then they go up to, you know, our higher prices are up around the $450, which is very remote. But when you break that down, you look at that basically $150 a tonne equates to 15 cents worth of grapes in a bottle of wine. $450 a tonne equates to 45 cents worth of grapes in a bottle of wine. So even at the top end of what we're getting paid at the moment, what's going into that bottle of wine is less than the cost of the bottle, less than the cost of the label, less than the cost of the capsule. So, you know, we're at the end of the line. We're the only place that can be squeezed because we've got fresh fruit, and we need to see those prices a lot earlier in the season. And, you know, We know that wineries have got budgets to do and things like that. So yes, I agree. Either, you know, around the end of September, the beginning of October, at least that way we've got a chance to say, well, are we going to continue to grow this crop for this year, or and put in more inputs just to lose more money? Because this has been going on for 4 years now since the Chinese tariffs came in. The massive oversupply that's caused has just wreaked havoc through our industry. And you know, the other two main regions haven't seen the same effects that we have seen. In the last 3 years since I've been in this position, we've lost 3,000 hectares of grapes, which equates to 15% of our region. We know we have to drop back, but we're looking down the barrel of a massive overcorrection if we don't do something to stop this. And we've, you know, lost out of our 275 growers in the last 3 years. We're now down to 225 growers, and that's continuing to fall. We do believe that we probably would have to reduce ourselves by 25% if China didn't come back. China's back, we're down 15%, and we're still not seeing any supply and demand changes. Again, that's probably due to a hangover of old red wine that's sitting in tanks at the moment that's depressing the bulk market. But all those things still don't make it any easier when you don't know what your price is going to be until right before harvest.
One of the discussions we had in the session recently was around if a mandatory code was implemented which did the things that you are seeking, that it could be bounded regionally, because there are some people who won't see a benefit and could see unintended negative consequences outside the warm growing areas. What do you see that kind of constraining or limiting of the mandatory code to the warm regions something that's worth considering also?
Oh, definitely. You know, we realise that the more premium regions around the place, especially New South Wales, South Australia and Victoria, have all got different issues than what we have. They're a lot smaller than what we are. You know, we produce between our three regions 70%. So if it was limited to the three hot regions, that'd cover our needs. And, you know, I'm not sure what the premium areas are asking for or need. So, you know, from our perspective, limiting to the warm irrigated areas would be satisfactory for us.
One other, just probably last question from me. Your submission makes the point that the supply chain implications for workers across that supply chain means poorer employment conditions, unpredictable work, insecurity of income and so on, that can affect workers across that supply chain. Do you want to say anything further about that and how the mandatory code might help protect workers across the supply chain in the industry?
Right, yeah, well, I think there's two parts to that question. At the moment, from a grower's perspective, we can't afford to employ people. It's as simple as that, you know, because the growers can't afford to pay themselves. You know, most of them are looking at other issues like off-farm income, reserves, farm household allowance and other things like that. We get told about RIC loans, but that's not sustainable because we can't service the loans that we've got now, let alone come on board with another loan. But that being said, we also realise that the wineries are getting pushed around much like they push us around by the likes of Coles and Woolies, and that's why we've advocated right from the beginning for a code of conduct that doesn't stand between the wineries and the growers, but goes all the way to the retailer. Because at the moment, the code that stands just between the wineries and the growers is, in effect, division. So basically, it's one against the other, and we want our wineries to be healthy because a healthy winery means that we're going to be healthy growers.
Mm. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Pocock. Go to Senator Sterle.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Gentlemen, thanks very much for coming today and sharing your message with us. I just want to declare, guys, I'm an ex-owner driver. I've come through the road transport industry. I understand cost recovery, and I'm not ashamed to say not only cost recovery, but profit on the end, and I can renew my equipment. It's taken us 20 years, but we've got through in this Parliament transport reform. We're owner drivers. Like you guys, independent contractors have access to the Fair Work Commission with a road transport advisory group. No lawyers allowed, and they can go in there and they can go for cost recovery. Now, I know minimum rates is something that a lot of people don't want to talk about, but you talked about cost recovery. What would that look like if you had your way it was in the mandatory code of conduct?
Cost recovery? Well, don't think I'm not sure whether cost recovery jumps into the mandatory code or not, because it's a supply and demand issue for us. So, you know, at the moment, we're in a bad oversupply, and it's on a separate issue. We've asked government for a reset to help us out with that, and whether that, you know, one of the couple of things we've been looking at in that regard would be to, you know, reduce the old style wine in tanks that's starting to become unsaleable, to get that out of the system, release the pressure on the bulk market, which would then allow wineries to sell their products at a price that should be able to afford us to get a cost recovery on our product at the other end. So we realise that supply and demand isn't going to be exactly the same as a code of conduct, but while we're in an oversupply situation, we need a code of conduct to protect us from the other issues that we've already mentioned.
Okay. And I know we're short for time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sterle. Senator Colbeck.
You mentioned, and Senator Pocock also asked you about the fear of taking action or taking approach to the wineries with the current voluntary code. Do you think that goes away with a mandatory code?
I think a properly structured mandatory code, you know, is there a chance that, you know, that mandatory code could have somewhere where there could be anonymous complaints go through to the ACCC that they could investigate? I realise that there'd be no litigation or anything like that come out of that, because you need someone to stand up and take responsibility for those sort of things if you want it to go further. But that would give growers a lot more confidence, I believe, to actually make a complaint if one was warranted. And, you know, to be quite honest, I'm not a grower. I might hand over to these boys here to, you know, elaborate a little bit more on that and where they see those sort of things.
So in that context, a capacity for somebody to get the ACCC to come and have a look rather than having to specifically stand up. It may mean down the track you've got to stand up and as part of an action, but you can initiate the ACCC coming to have a look at what's going on and use its other information gathering powers.
Exactly.
You've got to look at the situation too, that if growers start complaining too much of the wineries, if you look at the past, they've got a black book. If you get in that black book, you will not deliver to that winery again. So there's instance there that growers would be good if they could complain to the ACCC. I know they probably won't get off the backside and go publicly on it, but there is issues out there where you can't mix to winery too much because you won't be delivering through next year. The other, going back to the mandatory code we spoke about earlier, was that there was an incident this year with the winery that didn't sign the code. He hadn't signed, not one of those three who got signatories. It came out with some price of May and June. I'll give you an example, like Shiraz was 300, which is fine. Growers went out and spent a heap of money, bought fertiliser, chemicals and what they had to buy. And what happened probably in November, we never said that. So they're talking now paying about 160, 170. But if the prices of the grapes would come early with the code in September, growers at least could say, well, I won't spend all this money on chemicals and fertilisers, I'll wait till September. And that could cover a lot of expenses by growers. It's a bit hard, like, for growers to go out and spend money these days. We're sort of, you look at the influence of anti-slavery, but I'll tell you what, when growers don't get paid for their crop, 12 months later and they've still got to harvest another crop, which I reckon that should be the anti-slavery thing for growers, which we don't get it. If we employ somebody, we don't pay the right price in a matter of a few weeks and we get charged for it. But growers, for the grower, we've got nothing. And I think somewhere along the line, somebody needs to look at those issues. We just can't afford to keep going. Banks are making it very hard for us. And I'll tell you now, very hard. Just don't want to loan money to the grape industry. Growers are selling part of their water allocations. And that's probably going to stop in the next 12 months. I can't keep selling water to keep going. And there's major problems in the industry. Look, I'll pass the Bob. Bob might say a few things.
Yeah.
Bruno security when they do retire. The issue I would have with the mandatory code is that it has to be in a way that wineries cannot contract out of it. And I'll give you an example. They might turn around and say, I can't afford to take your grape this year, but if you accept 10 payments or something of that nature, we can afford to take your grape, and growers will be in a situation where they're in the corner and they'll sign off on it, and that shouldn't be able to be done. So the mandatory code, if we could get one, it would have to be tight enough that wouldn't allow that sort of stuff to happen.
Just on the issues of pricing, is there a cycle of price changes across the season? So we've talked, and this came up in the hearing last week, about the timing of the release of the price. You've mentioned it now. Is there a cycle of price variation across the season?
No, I wouldn't say there's a cycle. I suppose what Bruno was referring to is that the particular winery gets their growers in after vintage and they have a yarn to them on a one-on-one basis, trying to give them an outlook of what's going to happen for the season. At that stage, they suggested to a number of growers that the price could be as high as $300 a tonne for Shiraz, and that's what led them to spend money on their crop. And then further down the track, it would have been less than 3 months. Still hadn't released prices, but suggested that, no, they hadn't suggested that at all, and the price was likely to be somewhere between 150 and 200. And by that stage, growers had taken their advice in the beginning and spent money. That I know one particular grower was going to pull out all his grapes, but on the notice that he was told that it could be $300 a tonne, he grew for another year, and that's cost him dearly.
So going to the quality assessments, which you mentioned and cropped up again last week as well, what are the issues around quality assessment that get used to downgrade or vary the pricing on grapes?
Right, yeah, well, that's a very interesting one, and basically with the quality assessments there at the moment, there's very few of them, but most of them on downgrading of grapes revolve around disease issues. And again, that's been an interesting thing over a number of years. I come from a winery background where I was a GLO in a winery, which is a grower liaison officer. And what we found there was the winemakers themselves, if it was a year where there was plentiful grapes, at the slightest sign of disease or an oversupply, if you like, the slightest sign of disease, they would condemn the crop. Yet if there was an undersupply, it was amazing how much more tolerance they could have to that disease, and they'd still bring it in as a normal crop instead of downgrading it to something like concentrate. There's some of the issues that we're facing, but to elaborate on that a little bit more, there are some sort of quality issues, and then sometimes you get grading of grapes, especially the premium varieties like Chardonnay. So, that's okay if the winemaker comes out, works with you and talks to you and tells you that where he's graded your grapes before you take them in. But we've got a winery here at the moment, the one that's, got 7 or 8 payments, still owes money from last year, that's put out on its price list this year that you could make it up into another tier, which would pay significantly more, but you wouldn't be aware of that until after it went into the winery, and they judged it for a week and decided where it was going to go, which, at the end of the day means if all of a sudden someone pumps over, you might have the best grapes in the world, they've turned into grape wine, someone in the winery pumps some Chardonnay into some Shiraz, and all of a sudden they go, oh no, well it won't make the top grade now, it's going to get downgraded. So you can get downgraded after you've delivered, based on the fact that, there could have been a mistake in the winery.
So how do you put parameters around that?
Well, I think each winery's got to have its own parameters, and in the case of red grapes, we've seen colour and sugar come in there. Sugar's a big part in white grapes as well. But if at the end of the day, really, if there's only going to be one parameter coming in, then, one grade, then there's no need for really parameters. It's just a matter of whether those grapes are fit for purpose or not. And if they are going to divide it up into grades, then the winery should specify what parameters they're using to grade those wines before it comes over to Weybridge to be delivered.
Okay, thank you.
Look, thank you very much. Look, we will have to go very shortly. I've got one quick question. Just got Parliament starting this morning. You mentioned an oversupply, as other witnesses have. Do you think there's a need for consolidation in the industry, and is there any role for government to help some growers exit the industry to balance supply and demand?
Definitely a role for consolidation, Matt. Basically Australian grape and wine, the oversupply didn't come from our volition. It was the Morrison government challenging China over COVID. The tariffs got dropped on us. Our biggest export market that took 40% of our export just went away overnight for a couple of years, which filled up tanks and has put us in this position. It'd be great to see the government, and I know Australian Grape and Wine's got a pre-budget submission in, that the same as that they had last year, where for the first time in history we've ever seen $30 million directed at helping growers transition into other industries and bring us back into balance. It'd be great to see that happen, because that way we wouldn't be wasting precious resources like water and chemicals to grow a crop only to have it rejected or kicked onto the ground. And I suppose to add to that, it'd be great from our perspective. We're not trying to knock the wineries, we can see where they're going, but it'd be great to see something like the initiatives that come in Spain and France, where they actually take some of that old wine out of the thing. We're not talking about something that goes every day, but a one-off thing, to take it out of the industry, turn it into ethanol or something like that. There'd be a cost involved, but just to bring it back into balance so that we could have a bit of a reset and start moving forward as an industry again.
Okay, all right, that's very clear. Any other questions from the senators? Thank you very much for your time. Sorry we do have to go, but we really appreciate your contribution. Have a great day. Thank you. And look, I don't think anything was taken on notice, but if you have any further information, we're asking for that by Friday the 14th of February. Thank you, so we can finalise our report. And with that, thank you everybody for this short hearing, and I'll adjourn the hearing. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.